Hi plant friends, today I'm working on 3 orchids that just finished blooming. 2 of them were dropped off at my doorstep. For orchid number 1, the only thing that I'm doing is cutting this dead secondary spike. This orchid has 2 spikes and lots of branches. I'm hoping this orchid has lots of energy to keep pushing out flowers from these grow tips. So the next 2 orchids were dropped off at my doorstep with broken branches. I noticed this one has a stem that's turning brown already, so it's a perfect candidate to cut it all the way down. Don't be nervous about cutting it all the way down, because once the temperatures get cool after summer, they will start to spike again. What you're going to do is cut it as close as possible to the base. So for the 3rd orchid, we'll cut between the nodes to encourage a second branching. Now you'll notice the nodes, they're that little bump along the orchid spike, and that's where you'll get a secondary spike, or sometimes you can get a keiki, which is a small little baby plant. Don't be nervous about making your cut, just get right in, do the cut. The worst thing that will happen is the spike will totally die off, and then you'll just cut it down to the base. Now that we've taken care of the spike, let's take care of the roots. I can see some healthy roots already, some big nice juicy ones, but I also see some dead roots. And on the black pot, I'm not able to see what's going on with the root system, so we're going to take that pot off and we're going to put these orchids in fresh media. I've got 3 different types of media that I'm working with today. First up is the sphagnum moss. And to all my mix, I add a little bit of slow release fertilizer. I want to make sure these orchids are off to a good start with proper nutrition. Second media will be the coca coir or coca husk. And to this one, I'm going to add some sponge rock. If sponge rock's not available, you can add perlite or even lava rocks. Third media is the regular orchid mix from your big box store. This one should be easy to find. It's a nice mixture because it already comes with orchid bark, charcoal, and perlite. And remember to add some slow release fertilizer to the mix. The reason why I like slow release fertilizer is because it's easy, nothing to mix. I just sprinkle a little bit on the plants every 3 months. Not too bad. I do see some dead roots at the bottom, but don't worry, we're going to cut those off. Now the root ball is actually quite thick. This sphagnum moss is very compacted. I'm going to put her in some water to soak. Now I'm going to add a pinch of slow release fertilizer so she'll get just a little bit of nutrients while she soaks. Okay, let's get into this one. Oh, it's not looking very good. There's a lot of dead roots at the bottom, but I still think she'll pull through. There's a lot of nice healthy roots at the top, so we do have something that we can work with. All is not lost here. Let's gently, slowly tease this sphagnum moss away, and we'll cut the dead roots. This one you can see a lot of brown decayed roots. Now the root ball wasn't very compacted. The only thing that I can imagine is that this orchid was watered way too much. It wasn't allowed to dry out completely between watering, and that has led to the root rot. Now you can visibly see where the green part of the root compared to the brown part, and that's a good spot to cut away all those brown roots. Now don't be afraid, get right in there and cut away any brown roots. You can see the healthy roots. They're still nice and thick, and just where the decay starts, it's really soft and mushy, and that's where you want to make your cut. So we've got about 6 or 7 healthy roots to work with, plus a few nubbins. I'm going to place it in the nutrient-rich water to soak for a bit while we work on the second orchid. Much better compared to the first orchid, but I do see some dead roots, and the root ball is quite compact, so we'll need to let this one soak for a bit to loosen up that old sphagnum moss. In the meantime, let's work on the first orchid. After soaking, this sphagnum moss is falling apart very nicely. Now these roots are really popping. They're so nice and healthy. Look at that green color, and that white root, that's a new root. Now with this bright green popping of color, it's really making it easy to cut away those old dead decayed roots. Now you'll find that when orchids come in sphagnum moss, the center is very dense, so slowly massage the sphagnum moss away. I'm quite impressed with the root system on this orchid. We don't have a lot of dead roots, and there's a lot of nice healthy roots. Let's put this guy to soak while we work on the third orchid. For this one, it looks like there's a lot of healthy roots at the top. A lot of the bottom roots are dead, but we do have this nice, big, juicy, healthy root right here, so we do have something to work with. Now remember I mentioned about that root ball in the center? This one is quite thick. I'm gonna have to slowly tease this away, and you know what? It looks like a lot of the roots in this thick area are dead. So important to repot your orchids after they're done blooming, especially these new ones that are packed in sphagnum moss. Fresh media is definitely needed. Okay, we've got some roots to work with, so let's get these guys potted up. First up is the sphagnum moss. I did add a little bit of water to the sphagnum moss just to make it moist and soft to work around the roots. Now we're going to pack the sphagnum moss in the pot, but we're not going to pack it as tight as the nursery pots. We're going to gently work the sphagnum moss around the roots. Up next, it's a big box store orchid mix. Now you'll notice I'm using a clay pot, and I really like using clay pots because they're porous. It allows for a lot of air movement around the roots, and it helps me to cut back on overwatering. If I overwater, I know that the pot's going to dry very quickly and it will cut back on root rot. But if you only have plastic pots in your area, definitely go with the plastic pots. As long as you're providing a nice airy media, you'll be fine. And the nice thing about clear pots is that you're able to see the roots. If the root's green, you don't need to water. If the root is gray, then it's time to water your orchids. That's the nice thing about clear plastic pots. For the third plant, I'm using the cocoa chips with sponge rock. Remember, if you don't have sponge rock in your area, you can use perlite or lava rocks. So for the orchid bark and the cocoa chips, I've just potted these plants in the very dry media. So one of the things I like to do after they're nicely potted up is to put them in water to soak for about 10 minutes or so. After you water your orchids, it's super important to make sure there's no water sitting in between the leaves. If you've got water sitting in between the leaves, that could lead to stem rot, and that will kill your orchid. Now that we're nicely potted up, let's find a comfortable room for these orchids. This room is nice and bright. It only gets afternoon sun for about 2 hours. It's not intense sunlight, so it's a perfect spot for these orchids to work on new leaves and secondary spikes. Thanks for watching, plant friends. Remember to like and subscribe. Now definitely subscribe so you can keep up to date on these 3 orchids and their growing and flowering journey.